Okay, so we'll talk about the SQL Basics in this lecture. SQL Basics can provide you with some basic information about SQL this language, and you can also learn how to use SQL to perform some queries in your database systems. So it's a good time for you to practice the SQL we learned from the lectures. And before we start this section, you may also wonder why we need to have SQL and why we have to learn this. It can provide you with some notifications to learn this SQL this section very well. Formally, this SQL stands for the Structured Query Language, and in some other sites, it is also stands for the Standard Query Language. It doesn't matter. The name doesn't matter. You can understand in either way. It is initially developed by IBM by the download as well as Raymond in the early 1970s. It is also initially called SQL, the Structured English Query Language, or the SEQL. And later on, we changed the name to SQL instead. It is shorter. And there actually exist different versions of SQL. We have SQL 92, SQL 3, SQL 99, and SQL 2011. Actually, the standards has been changing with time because we need to develop or implement some new functions in SQL. It is still evolving with time, and then we may have some new versions of SQL as well. For the SQL, we have different versions, and the vendors may support different subsets of these standards. In other words, when we try to implement or test the SQL queries we learn in the lectures, when we implement them in the database systems in your software on your computer, you may have some problems because some of this grammar or some standards can be different from the standards of your database software. So therefore, when you are running the SQL queries we cover in the lectures on your computer, you need to check your software, the database software carefully to see the standards of your SQL versions supported by your software. Okay, and you may also wonder why we need to learn SQL. So SQL is very different from C++ or Java. It is a very high-level language. It just describes some of these functions we plan to implement. However, we never touch the details of its implementation. In this way, it provides us with this high-level thinking about queries instead of this low-level like implementation details. So SQL provides grammars to avoid satisfying and also data manipulation details that would be necessary in language like C++. Also, SQL is optimized in certain sense. The queries are optimized in SQL very well. It can also improve the efficiency of these query executions on your system. So that's the reason why we need to learn SQL in this section. It allows us to do some high-level queries, and it also helps us to optimize the queries we plan to perform to improve the efficiency. If you still remember, in the introduction section, we mentioned we have two different languages in database systems. The first one is called DDL. If you still remember, the DDL stands for Data Definition Language, right? DDL mainly focus or deal with its schemas or the relations. We can create some relations or tables with DDL. And in SQL, we support the DDL as well by creating some functions there. For example, we can create a new relation or new schema by creating a table instead in the DDL supported by the SQL. For example, we can create a table with a table name provided. We also need to illustrate all the attributes or the columns, both the names as well as data types. And sometimes we also need to include some of the constraints like the keys, right? What is the key for the table? We may also include some other table constraints and reference to some other foreign keys in other tables as well. So in SQL, we can create tables, and this actually is the DDL functions we can use in SQL. If you still remember, besides DDL, we have another language. It is called DML. DML stands for Data Manipulation Language. Generally, DML mainly deal with data tuples we plan to handle in our applications. Now we can implement some queries by using the DML to get some data or process some data we have. And SQL also supports a DML. So generally we can write a DML in a standard format. The standard format is like this. We have select from where. Almost all the queries we need to write later, they will be in this format. Select something from some of the relation where with some conditions. Select from where there are 3 reserved words or keywords by SQL, and each one will lead a clause in this queries. So we have select something from some relation or table and where followed by some conditions. We will show the examples later.